All right, so get this. Australia, 1860s. It's crawling with these bushrangers, gold heists, enough Wild West vibes to make a cowboy blush, you know? We're talking about a time and a place where the lines got really blurry between, well, outlaw and folk hero, really. And I'm talking seriously blurry.
It was a wild time, that's for sure. I mean, think about it. Over 2,700 ounces of gold just gone, stolen in broad daylight. The Ugara gold escort robbery of 1862. It's enough to make your head spin.
That's insane. Talk about a story, and I bet that's just the tip of the iceberg.
Oh, absolutely. But that robbery, it really captures something, you know. It shows just how audacious these bushrangers could be, especially the two we're focusing on today, Frank Gardiner and Ben Hall.
Okay, so two figures who really embody this era, but before we jump into their story, what was going on in 1860s Australia? What made bushranging practically a national sport?
Imagine this, a huge gold rush. But instead of California, it's Australia. Boom towns popping up left and right. Fortunes made and lost in the blink of an eye. It was a melting pot of opportunity and lawlessness. People were hungry for riches and the existing power structures. Well, let's just say they weren't exactly known for their fairness.
So, ripe conditions for, say, a bit of rebellion.
Exactly. And that's where the bushrangers come in. Some were driven by greed, sure, but many became symbols of resistance against the authorities. They challenged the system, often by targeting the wealthy and powerful.
Okay, I'm seeing it. They're like the Robin Hoods of the Outback.
It's a good comparison.
But were people actually rooting for them? Did they have real support?
You know, it's fascinating. These daring exploits really captured the public's imagination, you have to remember. Many Australians at that time felt marginalized, ignored by the system. And the bushrangers, they represented defiance, a thrilling kind of rebellion.
That makes it even more complicated, right? Because on the one hand, they're breaking the law, but on the other, they're fighting against a system that many felt was unjust. It really makes you wonder, where do you draw the line?
Exactly. It's a question that continues to fascinate people to this day. And Frank Gardiner, he embodies that duality perfectly. Even his beginnings are mysterious.
Oh, how so?
Well, some records say he was born Francis Christie in Scotland, others New South Wales. It's almost as if he appeared out of thin air, ready to make his mark on the world.
Wow, okay, so we've got mystery, social unrest. Sounds like Australia had its own Wild West right in its backyard.
Absolutely. But Ben Hall, his story is a bit different. Unlike Gardner, who seems to have been destined for a life on the run, Hall actually started out as a respectable landowner, a grazier.
A grazier?
Yeah, a rancher. He lived a life far removed from the world of bushranging. Imagine that.
Okay, so we've got Frank Gardner, this shadowy figure, almost born into the outlaw life. And then there's Ben Hall, starting out totally respectable, a landowner. What happened there? How do you go from tending sheep to riding with a notorious gang of bushrangers?
You know, Hall's story, it's a good reminder. Sometimes that path to outlawry, it's paved with really tough breaks. It's not always a choice, you know. He wasn't like Gardner, didn't seem destined for this life. Imagine this. You build a life for yourself, family, a farm, and then it's all ripped away.
This is more than just bad luck, right? This sounds personal.
Absolutely. We're talking about a series of tragedies, the kind that could break anyone. His wife leaves him, takes their child, and then as if that wasn't enough, he gets hit with false accusations, legal troubles, the works.
Wow, so the system he believed in turned against him.
Exactly. And it makes you wonder, you know, what would you do in that situation?
You're angry, disillusioned. And then there's Gardner and his gang, offering a way out, a life outside the very system that wronged you. Sounds like a recipe for rebellion.
And that's exactly what it was. Hall joins Gardner's gang, finds camaraderie, purpose, in a life that's been totally shattered. But here's where it gets interesting. Even as an outlaw, Hall had this reputation. He was known as the gentleman bushranger.
Gentleman bushranger. I'm not sure those two things go together.
It's true. It's this contradiction that makes Hall so compelling. He was known to be reluctant to use violence, especially early on. There's even a story about him during a robbery. He returns a stolen watch to a young boy.
Wow, okay, talk about clashing with that image of a ruthless outlaw.
Exactly, and it really makes you think about the inner conflict he must have felt, this sense of fairness, of decency, battling against the life he found himself in.
But trapped between two worlds almost. But that gentleman bushranger image, did it last? Especially with someone like Gardner, the career criminal, at his side.
That's the question, isn't it? As the gang's exploits get bolder, the stakes are higher, the pressure's on. Hall is forced to make impossible choices. Remember that Eugora gold escort robbery? The one that got them over 2,700 ounces of gold.
I'm starting to understand how these guys became legends.
Oh, that heist was a turning point. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about making a statement.
That must really put them on the map, but also put a huge target on their backs.
Absolutely. The authorities were humiliated. They wanted to put an end to this no matter what. And that brings us to a very dark chapter for both the bushrangers and Australian law enforcement.
So the heat is on, right? Gardiner and Hall, most wanted men in the colony. What happens next?
Well, their stories actually diverge quite a bit here. Gardiner, it's 1864. He's lying low in Queensland trying to disappear. He's even running a pub. Can you believe that?
Wait, really? From bushranger to bartender? That's quite the career change.
I know, right? But it didn't last. The law caught up with him near Rockhampton.
Ah, so the jig was up.
Pretty much. Arrested, tried, sentenced to hard labor. And eventually he's exiled from Australia, shipped all the way to Hong Kong.
Exile, huh? Not exactly the glorious outlaw ending I'd picture.
No, not quite. A far cry from those days of robbing gold escorts. And get this from Hong Kong. Gardiner ends up in San Francisco, dies there in 1903.
Wow, a bushranger who met his end not in a hail of bullets, but in a bustling city thousands of miles away.
It's almost poetic, isn't it?
Yeah, in a strange way. But what about Ben Hall? He's still out there, right?
He is, and with Gardiner gone, Hall becomes even more daring. New gang, bigger heists. But the authorities, they're done playing games. That Eugora robbery, it really pushed them over the edge.
And that's where the Felons Apprehension Act comes in. Basically, they made it open season on bushrangers, right?
Yeah, that's about the gist of it, yeah. Passed in 1865. Bushrangers could be shot on sight, no questions asked.
Wow, talk about drastic measures.
It shows just how determined they were to stop this wave of lawlessness.
So now Hall's facing a whole new kind of danger. It's not just about outsmarting the law anymore, it's about surviving it.
Exactly. It all culminates in May of 1865. Hall and his gang are camped near Forbes, not far from where it all began, really.
Oh no.
But this time the law is waiting.
This is it, the final showdown.
It's a tragic end to a really complex life. You know, it's believed that someone tipped off the police. They surrounded the camp. Hall, he must have known it was over. He tried to make a run for it. Gun.
They didn't even give him a chance to surrender.
It's still debated to this day. But the result was the same. Ben Hall, the grazier-turned-gentleman bushranger, dead at 27.
What a story. Tragedy, contradictions. From respected landowner to one of the most wanted men in Australia. All in just a few years.
It's amazing, isn't it? And his story, Gardiner's too, they still fascinate people. Makes you think, were they villains or victims? Heroes fighting a corrupt system? Or something in between?
Right, that's the thing. They weren't just outlaws terrorizing the countryside. They represented something more, rebellion against injustice, the desire for freedom. They forced Australia to confront some really uncomfortable truths.
Absolutely. Their stories still resonate today. Law and order, what drives someone to choose that life outside the law. These are themes that we're still grappling with.
That's the beauty of history, isn't it? It's not just dates and names. It's about understanding the forces that shape us, the choices we make, the consequences.
Exactly. And sometimes the most captivating stories, they're the ones where those lines are blurred. Right and wrong, hero and outlaw.
Gardiner and Hall, two sides of the same coin, forever a part of Australian legend. Their story reminds us that history is rarely black and white. It's complex, full of contradictions, and that's what makes it so fascinating. And hey, if you ever find yourself in Australia, be sure to check out the Forbes Historical Museum. They've got an amazing collection of artifacts and stories from this era, including exhibits on Ben Hall and Frank Gardiner, of course. It's a chance to really step back in time and experience this wild chapter of Australian history firsthand. So, next time you hear the word outlaw, think about the whole story. Who gets to decide who's a hero and who's a villain? What does it mean to live outside the lines? Until next time, keep asking questions, keep exploring, keep diving deep.